Good morning, everybody,
Good morning, Father.
and welcome. They say life is what happens after you have made plans, and in a sense, that's somewhat what's happening this weekend. The plans have been scrapped somewhat because of the weather, and I suppose it'll be like that for several days to come. But in the meantime, it's nice to see you all, and I'm glad that we're able to celebrate the Eucharist together on this day. The topic which we're meant to touch on today, and it's not directly related, though it is indirectly related to the readings today, but the topic really is respect for life, or the sanctity of human life, which is a huge topic, I suppose, in a sense. But as soon as you talk about the sanctity of life, I think what comes to mind straight away is the whole question of abortion, and it's one of those subjects, I think, that sort of like the elephant in the middle of the floor. It's one of those subjects that we like to sort of walk around, if you will. But I think it's important that at least we take a look at it and reflect somewhat upon it. You know, we're all aware of abortion, and that it's a business in our society today, and it is really, unfortunately, it is a business. But I so often heard it said, and I know you have too, that says, well, you know, what's the big deal? After all, this is my body, and I can do what I please with my body. I've heard that statement so often. But the bottom line is, in some ways it is your body, but if you're a baptized Christian, you're sort of like, you're branded, like for the rest of your life. You're no longer your own person. Ultimately you belong to God. In a sense, the little statement says, this little bud belongs to God. Your little bud then, after your baptism, from that time onwards, it belongs to God. And you need to keep that in perspective with regard to the whole question of abortion. And keep in mind also, of course, the fact that with regard to the human being, in Psalm 8 it says the following with regard to the human person. It's in verse 6. It says, "You have made him or her a little less than the angels, and crowned him with dominion." In other words, what that's saying to us is the human being is at the very high point of God's creation. It's next to God himself. You know, you have the lower animals and stuff, and then the human person is up here. And then you look at a phrase like this that you find, it was in the book of Job during this past week. And Job, as you know, the story of Job, he lost everything, including his family, etc., etc. And he's sort of lying there miserable on the dunghill. And his friends said to him, well, you might as well just, give up, okay? And Job's response was, naked, he says, I came into the world. Naked, I leave the world. He says, the Lord gave, the Lord took away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. In other words, God is the author of life. He is the one who called us into existence. He is the one who should call us out of existence as well. And I think that's huge. It's a huge message. And it concerns the beginning of life. It also concerns the end of life, and even concerns the fact that there are about 7 or 8 states in the United States at the moment where assisted suicide is allowed. And you say, well, that doesn't seem to go along with sort of God's understanding or the church's understanding based upon their awareness of God. So with all that in mind, okay, the fact that from God's perspective, life is a gift. It's a given from the moment of birth until the moment of death. Keeping that in mind, and down through the years, the fact that the church has respected that tradition and has done its best to inculcate that tradition in the minds of the faithful. With that kind of a background, then in 1970, if you may recall, in 1970, with the Roe versus Wade decision, abortion was made legal in the United States. Okay, all those all the protections were removed, so that any woman with a man, they're free to have an abortion. No strings attached. And if you really think about that, it's sort of crazy. During this past week, I was reading a case in the newspaper, and it was talking about some individual in our society that they accused of what we call animal abuse. That is, he had several dogs, and he might have had a few cats, but he neglected them completely. And so he's been brought up before the court. So I looked up in the paper. It says, what is the penalty? What is the penalty for animal abuse? Well, it says what I read was that the first offence is $5,000 fine, and also the possibility of a year in prison. And that's not just true with regard to dogs and cats. There's so much protection. There's so much protection given to the lower level of society, whether it's animals or birds or fish, whatever the case may be. They are protected. So you have that on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have human life that's under attack. And the whole question of abortion, it's not just, I think when it started first, when abortion was sort of made legal, I think people had the idea, well, it's only going to affect a few people. The bottom line is today, abortion is an industry. Several years ago, along with one or two other people, I spent a couple of hours on different days at an abortion clinic. And it's always interesting to sort of stand there and see that in the space of a given hour, you could have 6 or 7 or 8 different individuals or groups go into the abortion clinic. And it's just a reminder to us that this is a business. It's a business, and not only is it a business, but those in charge try to promote and propagate that business on an ongoing basis. And that is that's the world in which we live in today. But the fact that it would become so sort of attuned to it, if you will, that we sort of take it all for granted. And also the fact that during the year, less than a year ago, the Supreme Court of the United States sort of removed sort of the Roe versus Wade thing with regard to abortion. And from that time onwards, it's left up to the states to make a decision in terms of, is there any kind of legislation with regard to abortion. So if you're paying attention, it varies from state to state. And I think I was hoping that within Florida that some more protection would be given to the unborn. But what we got instead is what's known as Amendment 4. And if you have an Amendment 4, you need to read it. And furthermore, it's only a few sentences that says a lot, and said in a very confusing kind of way. But in essence, it seems to say that it'll make abortion even more available than it has been up to this point in time. I said this last night at Mass, and this individual came to me afterwards. He says, why don't you just, rather than talking around Amendment 4, why don't you just say, vote against it, which I think Catholic people need to do. And if you vote against it, then hopefully all will be well. And that takes me to the final point. Abortion is real, we know that. It's sad, we know that as well. And we know that it affects so many women, but also women are not alone in this, obviously, that it takes two to tangle, and certainly in this instance, it does. So men have to take their share of the blame as well. And that brings me to my next point. That is, I think there's a lot of psychological suffering that a lot of women are going through because of an abortion they've had maybe last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and sometimes they're so ashamed to do anything about it, ashamed to talk to anybody. And over the years, I've talked to several women, who've had abortions, and it was the first time to sort of mention it in public. And they got great consolation from confession, and also a little bit of counseling. You can help them at least realize that they're okay and that they're forgiven. And sometimes the problem is not God's forgiveness. Sometimes the problem is forgiving themselves. So it's a very challenging situation. But at least from the perspective of the church, and from my perspective, we are meant to be ambassadors of God's love and God's mercy. And if anybody needs that love and that mercy, I think it's in the abortion situation, it's most needed. And so it is here anyhow. I just promise that if that kind of mercy is offered, but you have to come forward and ask for it, and I guarantee you the results will be good. That's it, other than the fact that at the moment, you notice outside in different places there's a sign that says 40 days for life, that you're invited to pray during 40 days for a better understanding and a better appreciation of life, and hopefully in the process that our abortion will somewhat be lessened in the process. Keep in mind that sometimes what we cannot do legally or whatever, prayer is the best option. So I really would ask you to take that seriously and pray for an end to abortion in our society. And then you're truly doing God's work at this point in time. Amen.